Every December, my mother sits at her oak kitchen table with a glass of Riesling and a box of gold-edged stationery. The television plays some movie where snow always falls on time, and she begins her favorite ritual, the holiday newsletter. It isn't a letter, not really. It's an advertisement, a sermon, and an apology disguised as joy. She prints it on thick cream paper, signs it with love from all of us, and mails it to nearly 200 people, everyone, from distant cousins to the woman who once groomed our childhood dog. For 27 years, she has written our lives into perfect paragraphs. My brother Daniel, the prodigy who thrives in finance. My sister Marissa, the darling of her firm and new homeowner. And me, ever the creative spirit, currently exploring new opportunities. That last phrase has covered a multitude of sins: unemployment, heartbreak, eviction, and once a mild case of shingles. I used to think the newsletter was harmless, a paper snow globe where she could pretend the world still adored her children. But last year, the lies cut deeper. That was the year Daniel's company collapsed in scandal, the year Marissa's marriage ended in a restraining order, and the year I came home to take care of our father after his second stroke, only for my mother to tell the neighbors I was pursuing remote work in a creative field. Her letter read, "Our household is bursting with gratitude. Daniel's thriving, Marissa's glowing, and our sweet Natalie continues to bless us with her art and laughter." I read it at the kitchen counter, the smell of antiseptic still on my hands from cleaning Dad's bed sores. Laughter. I hadn't laughed in months, when I asked her why she couldn't just tell the truth, that Daniel was bankrupt. Marissa was gone and Dad was dying. She smiled faintly. "Because no one wants the truth in their mailbox, dear. They want hope. Hope or denial?" I asked. "What's the difference?" she said, and folded another page. That night I sat in my old bedroom, the one still painted lavender from when I was 15, and stared at her return address labels. 200 neat rectangles of self-delusion. I opened my laptop. The glow from the screen lit the small desk, the same one where I'd written college essays and breakup letters. I opened a new document and typed the header in the same looping font she always used. "Season's greetings from the Whitmans." Beneath it, I wrote, "This year, we've decided to tell the truth." I didn't know what form the revenge would take yet, whether I'd ever send it or even finish it. But as I began to write, the words felt different from hers. They had weight, like wet snow. I wrote about Daniel's arrogance and collapse, about Marissa's careful performance of happiness, about Dad's fading eyes when he asked if the holidays had come yet, and about myself, not as the creative spirit, but as the daughter who stayed. By the time I stopped, the sun was rising and the first draft of my newsletter lay printed on the desk, the ink still drying. It wasn't polished, it wasn't pretty, but it was real, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough of a gift. The morning after I wrote my version of the family newsletter, the house was silent except for the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen machine in my father's room. Outside, frost clung to the maple tree that had outlived most of our relatives. Mom had already gone to the church to help decorate for the Christmas bazaar. She'd left her usual sticky note on the counter. "Turkey in fridge. Don't forget Dad's pills. Love you, sweetheart." I crumpled it and threw it away. Then I opened her address book. It was old, held together with tape and sentimentality. Inside were pages of names written in her looping cursive, neighbors, old friends, the pastor's wife, people who hadn't spoken to us in decades. Each one represented a story, a performance she'd maintained for half her life. She'd told them about our family, not the family that actually existed, the real one that sat in this kitchen with peeling paint and unpaid bills stacked like hymnals. I decided to make 2 lists. List A, the people who believed her. List B, the people who should have known better. The first list was long. Church friends, distant cousins, the kind of people who would send back cards with glitter and scripture verses. The second was shorter, but sharper. My godmother, our childhood neighbor, my mother's bridge partner who had once whispered to me, "Your mother tries so hard to make it look easy." They would get my version. I printed the newsletter again, edited, refined. It began the same way hers always did, with the same cheerful greeting, but then took a turn she would never dare make. This year, our blessings have come disguised as endings. I wrote about Daniel's bankruptcy, not with bitterness, but precision. About Marissa's new chapter, which began the night she drove away with a suitcase and didn't look back. And about myself, how I was learning that caretaking and invisibility are often mistaken for the same thing. It wasn't cruel. I didn't exaggerate, I just took away the sugar. That afternoon, I found the boxes of gold-edged stationery in the hall closet and fed them into the printer one by one. The smell of warm ink filled the air. By the time the last page slid out, my hands were trembling, not from guilt, but from something that felt like awakening. I slid each copy into an envelope, addressing them in my mother's handwriting, which I'd perfected years ago while forging permission slips. When I sealed the final one, I felt a strange calm, as if something long dormant in me had quietly stood up. That evening, I went to check on Dad. He was awake, his eyes following the flicker of the TV. When I sat beside him, he turned his head slightly. "Your mother's still writing those Christmas stories?" he asked, his voice thin as paper. "Yes," I said. "And this year, so am I." He smiled faintly. "Good. Someone should tell the truth once in a while." I pressed his hand. "That's what I'm doing, Dad." When Mom returned home later that night, the kitchen smelled of her perfume and peppermint cocoa. She didn't notice the missing envelopes. She hummed as she sorted the mail, talking about the bazaar, about donations, about appearances. I almost told her right then. But some truths need to travel quietly, folded in paper and postage, so I waited, and watched her address her own cards, oblivious, radiant, rehearsed. 2 stacks on the counter. Hers and mine. By morning, both would be in the mail. I mailed the envelopes on a Wednesday morning, just before the snow began to fall. The post office was nearly empty, only the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of wet coats. I stood at the counter, holding 2 neat stacks of envelopes bound with ribbon, one written by my mother, one by me. Her version shimmered with the same careful lies she'd been telling for decades. Mine was quieter, heavier. I slipped them both into the outgoing mail slot, one after the other, and watched as they vanished into the dark metal mouth. For a moment, I felt nothing. Then, like the first chill before a storm, a slow calm spread through me. It was done. The first response came 3 days later, a phone call from my Aunt Carol. Her voice was sharp with the kind of politeness that hides judgment. "Natalie, dear, I just got your mother's letter, or perhaps your version of it." I said nothing. It was unexpected. "Truth usually is," I said. A long pause. Then she sighed. "Your mother must be heartbroken." "She doesn't know yet," I said. "But she will." By the weekend, the town was buzzing. At the grocery store, 2 women whispered near the produce aisle. I heard my family name, the soft cluck of sympathy, and then laughter. In a town like ours, gossip is quicker than weather. Mom noticed it first on Sunday after church. She came home unusually quiet, her lipstick slightly smudged, her smile trembling around the edges. "Everyone was odd today," she said. "Kind, too kind." "Maybe they finally read the truth," I murmured. She looked at me sharply. "What does that mean?" But I only shrugged. Maybe people are just tired of pretending. That night I found her in the dining room, surrounded by scattered envelopes. She was rereading copies of her own newsletter, comparing handwriting, flipping them over and over like evidence. "Did you do this?" she asked, voice shaking. "Do what?" "Send something." "I sent the truth, Mom. To your list." Her face went pale. "Why? Why would you humiliate us like this?" "Because you've been humiliating us for years, just quietly, beautifully, with ribbon and glue." She sank into a chair, clutching one of the letters. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I only ever wanted people to see us at our best." Then maybe you shouldn't have lied about what that looked like. For days afterward, the house felt like a war zone made of silence. We moved around each other like ghosts. The Christmas tree stayed half-decorated, its lights tangled, as if even it couldn't decide which story to tell. Dad, half asleep in his recliner, was the only one who seemed at peace. He'd smile faintly when I passed. Once he said, "Feels like you cleaned the air, kiddo." Maybe I had. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, printed neatly, my own words highlighted in yellow. Someone had written in pen, "Thank you. You said what we all knew but never dared. No signature, no clue. Just proof that someone somewhere had wanted the truth too." I read it 3 times before tucking it into my journal. For the first time, I felt less like a villain and more like a witness. Maybe that was what revenge really was. Not destruction, but revelation. By Christmas Eve, I hadn't spoken to Mom in a week. She spent her days on the phone, trying to explain, to control the narrative. But words were slippery things. Once released, they grew their own roots. I spent that night beside Dee. Christmas morning arrived like an apology. The world outside was buried in snow, white, silent, forgiving. The house smelled of pine and cinnamon, though neither of us had bothered to bake. The tree still leaned slightly in its stand, ornaments dangling at uncertain angles, lights blinking as if unsure whether to stay lit. Mom hadn't spoken to me since the night she found out about the letters. She moved around the kitchen quietly, every sound a negotiation. The soft clink of mugs, the careful pour of coffee, the way she avoided looking at me when she set mine on the counter. "Black," she said. "Like you take it." It was the first thing she'd said to me in days. "Thanks," I said, and we both stood there, the steam rising between us like a fragile peace offering. After a moment, she sighed. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing," she said. "Half of them want to know what happened. The other half just want to make sure we're alive. And what do you tell them? That my daughter had something to say." She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time, her eyes weren't angry. "Just tired. Was it worth it?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. I thought of the late nights, the ink, the envelopes, the feeling of watching my truth slip into the mail slot, the strange peace that came after. "Yes," I said finally. "It was," she nodded slowly, as if she'd expected that. "You've always been like your father," she said. "You think honesty will save you. And you think pretending will." We stood there a while, the snow still falling outside, until she spoke again. "Your letter, it wasn't cruel. It wasn't meant to be. Then what was it?" "Real." Later I went to check on Dad. He was sleeping, his breathing shallow but steady. On the table beside his bed sat a small pile of mail, the kind neighbors drop off out of habit. On top was a single envelope, addressed in my mother's handwriting. The return address was ours, but the name on it was mine. I opened it carefully. Inside was one of her newsletters, but rewritten. It began with her usual greeting, "Season's greetings from the Whitmans." And then, beneath it, a line that wasn't hers alone. "This year, we learned that truth doesn't ruin love, it clarifies it." I stared at it for a long time, feeling something loosen inside me. She'd written about Dad's health, about Daniel starting over, about Marissa finding her way, and about me. "Natalie is home," she wrote, "and her honesty keeps us honest too. No gold trim. No flourishes, just words, simple and true." That night we sat together on the couch, drinking cocoa in the glow of the half-lit tree. The air between us felt lighter, as if all the years of pretending had finally cracked open. Mom looked over at me. "Next year," she said softly, "maybe we write it together." I smiled. "Only if we promise to tell the truth." Deal. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet, steady, endless. And for once, I didn't feel the need to edit anything. Epilogue in. January, a card arrived from Aunt Carol. It was brief, handwritten, no glitter, no scripture. "Your letter was shocking," she wrote. "But maybe that's what Christmas needed." I pinned it to the fridge beside one of Dad's old photos. Him laughing in the yard, his hands covered in soil. The picture looked truer than any newsletter we'd ever sent. I realized then that truth wasn't a weapon. It was a light. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is turn it on, even if it blinds everyone at first.